Yes, that's very, very polite to say 2 decades. When I was a kid, one really could study environmental topics outside of engineering. When I was a kid, the biggest issue around environment was RECLA, was sort of solid waste and toxic waste. So I was at school, funny and sexy, smart, fun and sexy school, and couldn't really do this. So I went overseas and I studied in France, and you couldn't really do it there either. So I ended up at USAID for a little bit of an internship as a senior, and I was very interested at the time. At the time when neoliberalism wasn't a bad word, and Hayek was in the air, which can be rash, but it was a time of real interest in the role of markets in society and having a sort of micro view of how change happens, as opposed to more traditional Keynesian view of life. So I was very excited by markets and economics, and ended up doing a degree in political science and economics, and then ended up at the University of Chicago, where I got involved in environmental economics, which was really the only way at that time through energy to really express an interest in environmentalism. I built my first CO2 abatement curve in 1993, and from there went into consulting in energy, which again is the only way to sort of do it. By the time of, at that point in the 90s, people knew that CO2 was an issue. Back in the 1950s, along with working with new people knew it was an issue. It became a business issue really in the 1990s, and then with the Obama administration in particular, it became an issue. So it became sort of respectable to start do this for a living. And that's what I've been doing since the 90s, looking at first PV and wind, and then as sort of different technologies have rolled through. And what's been heartening has been that many of the clients and the topics that were just kind of esoteric and interesting and kind of laughable, frankly, for most of the industry, have now become very mainstream. I just came back from something called CERA Week. It's the Cambridge Energy Research Association, or Associates meeting, which is sort of the main energy meeting in the whole world, which happens in Houston every year. And for the last several years, this was an oil and gas conference, which is held in, of course, Houston. For the last several years, the big oil around the world, including the international oil companies and the majors, sort of embarrassed that they're in the oil business, the oil and gas business. It's like, yes, we do CCS, we do hydrogen, yeah, we kind of do oil, but never mind that. In part because of largely because of investor sentiment, largely because of your generation's impact, frankly. So thank you for that. This year it's begun to change a bit. So there's a little bit of spring in the step of the oil companies for reasons that I'd like to get into, where some of the optimism, and I would say sort of ideological stridency that we've seen around sort of ESG and sustainability is beginning to have some consequences, some negative consequences. So the things that you guys are learning about sort of the reality of the logistics and the economics of actually, making climate change, fighting climate change effectively is really important. And sort of good intentions aren't sufficient. Exactly, that was not an answer to your question.
Well, it definitely was. And it begs maybe digging a bit deeper for your current role. Because we've been talking about all these different things, right? Energy transition, all these. So you started with, you said PV, photovoltaics, then wind, then maybe more recently more storage. But around all these ideas, it feels like when it comes to the energy transition, one significant challenge is financing. Mm-hmm. And I know you've been thinking about it for quite a while at this point. Yeah. So I guess the million-dollar question, pun intended, is who will pay for it, or how to think about the bill associated with it?
The answer very clearly is nobody, and that's basically what's going on. Let me step back. Well, the basic problem I think that we're seeing around the world right now is that in this country we have sort of a world of subsidies, which people think is carrots, and in Europe is sticks. You guys have heard about this. And neither of them are anywhere near sufficient to actually pay for all the change that's required to get anywhere close to the targets that are promulgated by legislators around the world. And I think fundamentally there's two issues. I don't know if you guys have been exposed to Vaclav Smil, who's sort of kind of a meme at this point. But on the one hand, energy transitions of this magnitude take decades and decades. Even though that's not convenient, it's just sort of the way it works. Just no matter how hard you try. And secondly, this is very unusual in that this is not being driven by some sort of technological revolution, which has driven some sort of new economically driven set of values, but instead it's very much a political decision. And we have very few precedents to this, if any. And as a result, there needs to be, if it's a political phenomenon, where basically, all value is, in some sense, fiat. It's just what we decide is to be the case. But most people around the world haven't decided that. And in fact, the idea that there's value to these things among folks in the developing world, in the global south, is viewed by many, if not most, as sort of neo-colonialism. And within this country, it's become highly politicized. Certainly in Western Europe, it's become highly politicized. So there's not, in my opinion, political will to actually make this stuff happen at the magnitude that's required. Instead, what we see both in Europe and in the U.S. is quite different in China, where politics takes a different form. We see kind of mandates or wishful thinking being legislated. And I believe that over the next several years, we're going to see that almost all of those plans actually aren't feasible, they don't actually work. So we developed, if you guys looked at Lazar's levelized cost benefit, we actually do that analysis every year. I devise personally the levelized cost of storage. So, we have a sense of what things cost, but they really don't work economically unless there's a value to carbon, or people are somehow willing to pay more until the technology comes down rapidly. And the costs come down radically because of technological change, or maybe because of behavioral change. So it just doesn't close. In terms of financing, the way this is getting paid for in this country is largely through project finance. And you guys will learn a little bit about project finance. There's basically the cash flow that comes off of the project pays for the system. That in turn has to get paid for by electricity ratepayers, or in some cases natural gas ratepayers. In many cases, some large corporations do for a number of reasons, have a big incentive to decarbonize. But so far, they're very small costs, at least in this country. In Europe, they're a little bit more substantial. Once they get a little bit higher, people begin to resist. And that's even in areas along the coasts where people are, the general populist voters tend to be kind of receptive to this concept. In the middle of the country, it's a political statement, and there's great opposition to it. In Europe, they've been able to take it up further, in part because there's greater public solidarity around the issue. But there we see massive resistance, largely driven by the business community in Germany in particular, where there was a series of mind-bogglingly bad policy choices. Every bad choice you could make by the German administration, across multiple administration selections, very high cost, which was kind of hollowing Germany out of its industrial core, which will likely come to this country or to the Middle East or just go away. So nobody's willing to pay except for private financiers. IRA and so forth is nice, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's necessary. And then I think the other groups that are willing to pay have been, because of the project finance ultimately in the renewable sector, have been some large corporations which had to make big bets. So we see this with EVs right now, we'll get to that in a minute. The industrial goods manufacturers, etc. So they are very interested in investing behind this because it gives them ways to make money in what have been kind of moribund markets. Energy, if you look at sort of energy demand growth per capita as a percentage of GDP over the last many years, it's actually been stagnant or falling. So this is a chance for many of these folks to actually make some money. So they're supportive of it, they're willing to do it out of a little bit. But ultimately, I think we'll see over the next few years it's going to come to a bit of a head because of this lack of willingness to pay.
Now, this actually opens up a lot of discussions. One thing you referred to is the levelized cost of energy. In fact, I was teaching right before coming here, and I can see students from that class. I've been teaching over the last couple of weeks I'm seeing students from those classes as well, and we were talking about the exact idea of the last cost of energy, trying to figure out which form of generation technology would bring the lowest cost of generating electricity. And as you calculate these numbers, solar currently the lowest last cost of energy.
Sort of.
Yes, go ahead.
So everybody has always known the levelized cost of energy is kind of BS. But it was developed really to call attention among, well, levelized cost of energy was popularized by this bank called Lazard, which is an investment bank, which does a lot of business with utilities. And the leadership of it wanted to sort of make the American utility industry aware of the fact that renewables were real, that they were sort of viewed as a joke for many decades. And then over the last 15 years, the costs have actually come down substantially. So they calculated using a very, you guys understand that the alphabet is really simple. The problem is the cost of energy depends upon what you want to use it for. And so particularly as there's more and more variable renewable energy that enters onto the system, it doesn't keep the lights on. In fact, the marginal contribution that it has towards reliability falls as there's more and more of it. So there's something called the system cost of energy, which takes these factors into account. If you're thinking about energy as something that provides energy reliably, as opposed to just kind of theoretically a dollar per megawatt hour. Right. So you'll hear a lot more about this. And the issue now is everybody realizes that dispatchable or firm decarbonized energy is really very important. So there's an honest to goodness nuclear renaissance, particularly around small modular reactors, which are in theory easier to build. A lot of interest in geothermal. Lots of interest in longer duration energy storage, possibly hydrogen and so forth. So that's kind of where a lot of the investment is going these days.
Very good. So we've been talking about small modular reactors today as well, and throughout the process too. So that's definitely one of the interesting areas. Still in the development phase, obviously. But over the last 5 years,
those are getting built.
Over the last 5 years, one hard number is that the highest of new capacity additions come from solar, wind, and batteries. And batteries is definitely one of the areas that you focus on. And I think this revealed factors of the industry towards solar plus wind plus batteries is telling us some important messages.
Sure.
And for batteries specifically, there has been this talk for a long time, whenever we talk to industry practitioners, that like, oh, they're almost there, not there yet, almost there, but not there yet. So are we there yet?
Sorry,
with batteries?
So batteries are a local industry. So AES, which is what you guys can see.
Oh yeah,
and it's a great place, by the way, to get a job. I mean, it's a wonderful company. Not respected by investors very well, but it attracts really interesting, smart people, and with your kind of background.
I mean, yesterday, almost, by the way.
I'm sure. So they were early components of it. Energy storage using lithium ion is interesting for short duration, as you know, and folks gravitated to lithium ion because EVs went to lithium ion, and so provided this tremendous kind of momentum in terms of R&D, as opposed to the energy sector having to do the R&D to develop the technology. So that's why lithium ion was sort of dominant in energy. Short duration energy storage has very little to do with the long-term solution of a mostly VRE, variable renewable energy kind of system. So I'm clear if that's really where the world would go anyway. If that were where the world would go, you wouldn't use lithium ion, you'd use some next generation things like Form, of course, and Maltex, and different kinds of longer duration energy storage. The reason energy storage has taken off in this country so much is very much around very customized market design, particularly in PJM, which played very much, which by design played to the strengths of lithium ion, and very, very generous subsidies in California. So it's a very fragile thing. It's become investable over the last 3 or 4 years, but it's still kind of sort of, and it's fascinating if, if there are economists or OR people in the crowd. I mean, it's a really cool optimization problem to figure out how to use it well. But it's something that's very delicate. So longer term, it's very unlikely that could be part of the solution. It's a shock absorber with a very small spring.
I see. And your projection is looking forward, given that we invest more into variable renewable energy sources, we will need more storage. But that specific storage technology may not necessarily.
It almost definitely won't be. At least after March, and will be longer duration stuff, and it has to be more seasonal. But I think the question is, if you look at it on a dollar per, the things you're teaching your students, dollar per kilowatt month or per dollar per megawatt hour. So different ways of thinking about it. It's quite expensive compared to long duration, and even other forms of long duration energy storage are expensive. If SMRs or nuclear takes off, that's going to be much cheaper. If fusion gets done, which is I know that's really kind of a joke, but it really shouldn't be. In fact, I'm kind of amazed it doesn't receive a lot more financing, a lot more government financing. Yeah, but it's been at this stage for many, many years. And we work with some of those companies. Many of them were SPAC'd over the last few years, so they're not so far away. 10 years, 15 years. And maybe some other things we don't even know about. So I'm not so convinced that VRE is really going to be the future. And the exception is China. China's the place that's most relevant, and they're making such large investments in it, maybe it will be, at least for some time. But it might look like sort of Stanley steamers. It might look like this, sort of steam-based automobiles circa 1910, which people thought might be the future, and then people look back and think that was sort of a weird blind alley.
So just to make sure that we clarify and put this into context. So currently, wind and solar combined is about 7 or 8% of U.S. generation profile.
From an energy perspective.
Exactly. From an energy perspective, in terms of the total energy output compared to the total energy used, electricity.
Yeah, but it's just capacity versus output.
Right. Electricity output is 7 to 8%. So you're not building a future in which this would be.
No, I think you're
substantially higher.
So the reality, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Right.
But that is not politically sellable. And all of this is in the United States. This is all very much a public policy process. So there's a relationship between the governor's office, the Department of Energy, and local regulators who have to come out with forecasts. And there's a lot of political pressure. Thank goodness, again, thanks to you guys. Thank you very much, sincerely, for decarbonization. The only way that people can see it right now is with VRE, particularly given political opposition to nuclear. So you see forecasts with that, and if you do simple Lagrangians and stuff, the stuff you're teaching your students, simple sort of optimization, that's what you end up with. So right now that seems like the answer, but it's very, very difficult to make it work economically. So I wouldn't be surprised if we look 20 years from now and say, oh my gosh, I don't believe we actually thought that's going to happen.
That's the opposite.
So
I see what you're doing on that. And maybe even in the interest of the time as well, we've been talking about sustainable energy part.
Yes.
And maybe let's switch gears a little bit more to maybe sustainable technology. Okay. And one of your roles is specifically infrastructure.
Yeah.
And when it comes to sustainable technology, one of the technologies that we discuss in our courses is electric vehicles. And it interfaces.
And Georgetown has a tradition of actually looking at EVs.
Exactly, right. And in terms of infrastructure, so the charging infrastructure seems to be a major issue.
It's a giant mess.
So what are your experiences? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities associated with charging infrastructure for EVs?
Okay, it's a mess. And again, there's no money. That's the problem. So there has been lots and lots of interest among investors in it. And unfortunately, the price that you can pay that is in equilibrium with people being willing to adopt EVs, given the current subsidies, it means you can't charge a lot for the charging infrastructure. And frankly, if you think about it, there's not that much sex appeal associated with gas pumps. It's just not that big of a deal. So fundamentally, there's just not enough money to pay for it right now. And there's obviously a coordination issue where drivers have range anxiety and stuff, which is real. Certainly, given the state of a lot of the charging in the non-Tesla network, they actually should be concerned about it. So it's very challenging. We have dozens of clients, very, very sophisticated private equity investors, as well as some of the biggest companies in the world, all the autos, auto industry is very, very interested in getting into it, but it's very, very difficult to make money. I think what will have to happen is maybe a little bit more government subsidy, maybe let utilities or even state players invest in it directly, so the cost of capital associated with it can come down, and then you'll see a bit more of it. It's unclear though if this, the desire for, we just actually released a report for the American Trucking Association on, what it looks like for medium duty and heavy duty. We've done this for big cities around the country and around the world. It's unclear if that's actually ever going to electrify. So the stuff that's most challenging is this very high energy density charging for medium duty fleets and for heavy duty. And it's not clear what's going to happen with that. And hydrogen is really problematic for that as well.
How about lighter?
That's doable, but again, the money in the organization hasn't been there so far. And as usual in the U.S., it's a patchwork, so the states have different regs and so forth. So it's been a bit of an embarrassment, with the exception of Tesla, which is an interesting story. If you look at economics majors here as well, it's really interesting with these new industries where you basically need to have vertical integration early on because you don't have deep markets in between to actually coordinate decisions. You can't rely on price signals. You actually have to rely on people making decisions, a la sort of rubber plantations back in 1910.
We were talking on exactly this point of vertical integration at Tesla very recently in the class. So I think this was a really nice segue to that. And so look, I have quite a few more points that I want to discuss. But then no, just the opposite. But then I'm sure we have questions from the audience as well. Why don't we do this? Okay. I just throw a few keywords.
Okay.
And you just giving me 2-3 sentences.
Very good.
Associated with that. And then maybe we go to the audience and we ask the audience for more details or maybe different aspects. So
that sounds good.
All right, I'm going to call this a lightning round.
I don't know where you got that term. That's brilliant.
So hydrogen.
Helium.
Oh,
no, I'm sorry. I thought it was okay, very good.
I was talking about hydrogen.
That gives us word association. No.
That's good. Yeah.
Hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is the name of the game. Green hydrogen is sort of knocked out to a large extent by 45D. White hydrogen is interesting if it actually exists economically.
Doesn't go.
It could. The Economist had an article about it a few months ago, and there's a lot of money poking around to see, sticking straws in the ground to see if it actually exists. If it does, it changes things very, very substantially. But in the near term, if you guys are looking for a job, get a job, which is blue hydrogen. It's not quite as sexy or environmentally nice, but it actually makes economic sense.
Carbon capture, utilization, storage.
Yeah, so it's a little bit like what Joe and I said about Western civilization. Yes, you should try it. So it's unclear if it will actually work. So every time major oil companies have tried it, there have been big engineering snafus. It's probably necessary, it's almost definitely necessary for things to work in the current technologies. And there's a lot of money behind it, particularly with IRA. It's what big oil wants to have happen, so therefore it will happen, both with the IOCs as well as in this country. So it's very, very interesting, but from an engineering perspective, it's less proven than we would like.
Electrification, particularly for transportation, is it the best way to decarbonize?
For light duty, in the economics we have right now, yes. It's really the only choice, unless you're in Brazil. Unless you're in places where there's lots of sun and cheap sugar, in which case you can do it with biofuels, but otherwise biofuels just don't work with current generation technology. And that's particularly an issue with SAF.
Got it.
And sustainable aviation.
Sustainable aviation fuels, So maybe one final point before I turn to the audience is we have many students across multiple degree programs in the audience. And they are, broadly speaking, interested in a career around sustainability.
Right.
So what would be some advice, some set of advice that you would give to our students in order to be successful in their careers? And it's a big question.
So I think the great news is there are lots of ways to do this now for a living, which was not the case when I was in the issues. And it depends how much money you want to make and how you want to live your life. So if you guys really want to make a ton of money, want to make millions and millions of dollars and retire before you can do it with sustainability related stuff. It's not that hard. So you do that within the investment banking and private equity, possibly hedge funds. You can do it if you want to make a little bit less money and look like me after a few years. You can do it with consulting as well, or in sort of corporate planning positions across a lot of businesses. There's lots of opportunity to do it in government across multiple well, what happens. But at some point, what the rhythm is, you can do it in government and certainly in state government. And then there's, you can do it also in nonprofits and so forth, and you can do it in academia. So there's a gazillion different ways to express it. And the trick is, do things that you actually like and are good at. There's no trick to it at all.
All right. I think with that, let me turn to the audience.
Raise your hand. We've got mics that we can bring over to you.
Exactly so.
I'll start over here on this side.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Walsh. I'm part of the ESM program here. Sorry. Speaking about SMRs a bit more, there's a negative connotation around just nuclear in general in the United States and then even globally. How do you kind of get around that public perception of having a small modular reactor in someone's neighborhood, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's not necessarily in one's neighborhood. And it depends what part of the U.S. you're in, because in some parts of the U.S. people actually really like nuclear for a number of reasons. I think it's a sort of psychology of risk kind of question. I think it just takes time if nothing happens. I don't know, what else to say, but the reality is that the benign stuff is what kills all people. And so trucks kill thousands and thousands of people from just particulate matter every year, and it tends to be poor people with who are, don't look exactly like them. So it's not necessarily rational, but I don't know that there's, and this is a more general point about how do we get the general populace to think to use facts to make decisions. I think that it comes with education, but it's really, really, really hard. And I think it's why we're in this sort of difficult situation where we have kind of well-intended but really unrealistic policy considerations. And then we have opposition to it, which is frankly even less important.
Thanks so much. My question is, what role do you think development finance institutions have in transitioning to the energy?
The bank has been, the bank and the IFC have played a much smaller role than I would have expected. And I think part of it is a lot of concern, and I mean, it's a complicated internal political question. I think there's a lot of concern about crowding out private capital, I guess. I think they could play a massive role, particularly with wealth transfers, if the developed world was actually serious about that. But they haven't so far, and they continue to do things which are, and I hope you're not with the bank, but they've done strange things when it comes to continuing to support hydrocarbons and so forth, which is very politically fraught. So I think with financing in general, that because of the state of the industry, having long-term, low-risk cost of capital is massively capital-intensive, certainly compared to fossil fuels, which is much more of a variable cost business. So low-cost finance should be a big deal. Public-private partnerships should be a really big deal. Getting where all the humans are who don't consume energy right now to not make the same mistakes we had is a giant deal. And I kind of feel that they're not doing enough. And it's not for lack of really, really smart, well-intended people, but it's kind of a strange lacuna. It's a really good question. I don't have the smart answer.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Madhvi, and I loved your talk. Really good pointers. And my question today is: so in class, when we talk about financing of all the projects in energy, electrification, storage, everything, And when we talk about developing countries, we often talk about how developed countries can help with finance the developing countries.
Right.
But I feel like the developed countries themselves don't have so much capital. So how to what extent do you think that can be helpful?
I don't think it's a lack of money at all. I mean, the problem is that there's several. There's a lot of capital sitting around. There's a giant macroeconomic issue around all the capital sitting in China, which actually isn't being activated, which is like it could be a big issue for your generation. And the macroeconomics that will happen. Eventually, that's not going to continue to work. But in the near term, the issue is that there's not clarity around who's actually going to pay for things. So there's plenty of capital once there's a long-term commitment for offtake for any of these things. People are delighted to put money in. The problem is there's no incentive to pay for it. So there needs to be massive subsidies which are driven at the government level where the development banks could play a role. In this country, there's plenty of money sitting around, but again, there's just too much risk. So until there's, in the US, until there's a reason for people to actually pay for this stuff, it's not going to happen. And until there's political will to do that, it's going to happen in little bits and bobs and be massively, as most things are. So I wouldn't say it's a lack of capital, it's a lack of, outside of a small number of circumstances, it's a lack of clarity around who's going to pay for a long period of time.
Hi, my name is Jamir Kaur. I'm also one of the students here. First of all, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you about the comment that you made about VREs not being the big thing, potentially the next big thing. I'm curious, is this because of a lack of investment in VREs, or is it to do with the capacity versus storage gap that we see currently, or is it because of the lack of connectivity to the grid?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think in VREs require lots of transmission and some kind of storage. And when you get, depending on the climate situation, well, so there's two issues. There's a view of the world that VREs could decarbonize everything. And the problem is that there are a number of, you guys have heard about this, sort of hard to abate sectors where you can't easily electrify. So in those circumstances, you need some sort of molecular solution or something. So that's an issue. And VREs can be turned into molecular for things like hydrogen, and there's other ways to do it, but it's massively inefficient. So that's a concern. And then if you don't actually connect VREs, and China they do, but in this country we can't, for political reasons, once again, you need lots and lots of storage and over long duration, which becomes extremely expensive. And in some cases, we've done a lot of work, we've worked with Southern California Edison, thinking about how to design the grid for 2045 when we want to be totally decarbonized, and it just doesn't close, it just doesn't solve. You just can't get enough electricity getting NIMBY, building transmission into LA Basin for it to actually work. So you need some kind of, again, firm or dispatchable decarbonized energy for it to work. So I'm not against VREs. It's not the next big thing. People have known about it for 30 years, and it's been a very investable asset class for the last 15. But I'm increasingly skeptical that it's going to be such a panacea as people thought a few years back. I don't mean to be so negative.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Caroline. I'm an undergraduate in the SFS. And sort of back to the topic of financing, I know there's been a lot more interest in recent years in corporate sustainability and in sort of buying, trading carbon credit. Do you see voluntary carbon markets playing any significant role in contributing to finance, or do you think it really needs to be policy driven?
Well, those are separate things, I think. Carbon offsets are very out of favor right now, extremely out of favor. I think that's foolish. for lots of reasons, but there's lots of cheating and greenwashing and so on and so forth with it. So they're out of favor. There's a tremendous inefficiency in terms of DCM being separated from compliance markets. So just in terms of market liquidity and price realization and so forth, common standards, economies of scale, and actually doing the programs. So that's I think it is possible that that will be rehabilitated. In which case, I think it'll be a big part of the solution, should be a big part of the solution, and it has lots of wonderful ancillary benefits. And I really got into environmentalism because I grew up in suburban Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, and they knocked down all the forests where I used to play as a kid, which was very sad. And, offsets create forests and soil, useful soil, and even more ocean resources, which have all sorts of ancillary benefits around biodiversity and beautiful landscapes that human beings instinctively like, which are otherwise unpriced. So I'm a big advocate of it, but until it's rehabilitated, it's not going to play a very big role. And I don't know that all of this has to be a policy solution once the technology gets really, really cheap. But during, at least I think a lot of your career is going to have to be something driven by policy.
Time for one last question, but again, there'll be more time to chat more during the reception.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Dan Gabaldon, also part of the DSM program. I want to hear about your opinion on China. I mean, especially in let's use EV as an example. China's well, it's hard. I think charging is expensive. EV is expensive in the US. Well, in China, every brand is doing a price war in China right now, so people are willing to buy EVs.
Yeah.
Do you think? And also, I understand that the US definitely don't want to have China to take control in this energy transition. Yeah. But do you think that bringing in more EV grants to the US will kind of reduce the price of EV or charging and incentivize people to be more willing to purchase EVs?
This is why this is such a great class, because you can use these topics to think about the big topics in politics and the big topics in economics and then all this sort of social sciences. It's just a wonderful topic. And also it's an excuse to actually enjoy chemistry, which is something that took a lot of work for me to actually enjoy. I think to answer your questions, I think China shows that if you have an autocratic system, or maybe there are system groups. Autocratic sounds different. If you have, there are political systems in which you can make all of this happen much more inexpensively. And it does seem to me that there are really interesting trade-offs between trying to get things like IRA passed within the U.S. political system, and to do that, creating enough political salience in terms of nationalism and creating jobs and getting this legislation passed, and that creating a tension with the most economically efficient solutions, actually getting cost-effective technology into the country, which is importing it from China, at least for the moment. So I think China would have tons to offer if we could get over tribalism on everybody's side, so we should all just get along. But actually, really believe that. It sounds very naive, I realize, but it's true. And it's a horrible irony. So I do think in China it's very simple. You can make this stuff really cheap, and it's massively over-engineered with EVs in the Western world. And once you have economies of scale in terms of lithium-ion and soon, hopefully, sodium-ion processing, which is something we should really be talking about in the class, that's really the next wave. This really can't happen. It looks very, very different. And I think there's a lot of, looking at China aside from, remember the political ramifications, there's real hope that this can happen next. So they've gotten a lot of things much better than we have in the Western world. And I wish we could take advantage of it. I wish the politics would.
All right, and with that, let's thank Dan, and we're going to proceed to the
Here's the shades. And do you still have the playlist up?
Music? Yeah.
Music? Background music?
Actually, no. But